Well, good afternoon again to everyone here in the room and online. I'm sorry you'll have to put up with me in a second panel, but I'll promise I'll be very brief. And it is my great pleasure to moderate this panel, which will be on the new space challenges. So an extremely topical and interesting session we are going to have. And for that, we have four wonderful speakers, which I will introduce shortly. The first one with the indication that each please speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have enough time. We'll have an hour and a half, so we'll have half an hour for the Q&A session. And our first speaker, who I think is ready to start, is Paulo Quental. Que eu aqui não consigo ver.
Yes, I'm here.
Engenheiro Paulo Quental, who holds a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the Instituto Superior Técnico, from the Technical University of Lisbon. He joined the Portuguese Space Academy in 2021, carrying out project management duties in the field of space transportation and access to space. And since July of this year, so very recently, he is the coordinator of the Azores mission structure for space. And he will speak today about new space ecosystems. I'll give you the floor, and I ask you to speak for 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I would like also to thank to Associação LPAC for this opportunity, and it's an honor to have the opportunity to share some thoughts related with the new space ecosystems and with what we want to accomplish for the Azores, Portugal, and Europe. So the presentation will mainly go through three main topics. One is new space itself. The other, briefly, we are going to talk a bit of innovation. And after that, about the Azores and Santa Maria, the space island. So the new space definition, it's that new space is global, entrepreneurial, and accessible. And new space refers to the emergence of the private space industry. New space ventures are becoming more common, spanning areas such as private launch companies, small satellite constellations, or, for example, suborbital tourism more recently. And to have an idea of the new space economy, we can see that in 2020, the satellite industry was about $371 billion. And most of these investment or these revenues in this economy are related to ground equipment and satellite services, being that satellite manufacturing and the launcher industry are smaller parts in this economy. This trend kept to 2021, and it's on the path of a trend that started in the beginning of the century, where the investments in space tend to increase. And we have seen in the last years a relevant increasing in the investments, both from the public entities and from the private sector. And this can also be seen in the global turnover for the space economy from 2009 and 2020. In what concerns to investments in startups, we can see also in the last 7 years a trend of increasing, a significant trend of increasing of investments, and it's both from the private sector and the public sector. One can see that between from the year 2000 to 2021, $52 billion were invested in the startup sector, in the space startups, and 9% was public offering, and right now in 2021 it was 28, but the investment per year also increased a lot, and we see more venture capital, for example, involved in this activity of funding. And to have a new space economy, and with the goal to achieve $1 trillion by 2040, and Morgan Stanley identified 10 drivers to achieve that for the new space economy. So the first one is the satellite launch. Also the satellite internet that is getting more ready for the end user, the deep space exploration, lunar landings, Earth observation, of course, and how can we tackle climate change, for example, using space data, asteroid mining, the space debris and the space situational awareness. Also, space tourism, space research, and manufacturing, both manufacturing in microgravity and also manufacturing new manufacturing techniques to be developed here on Earth. And the goal to implement ecosystems, it's through innovation. And when we are looking to innovation, we cannot look at the growth bubble and point to the newest shiny thing, but have a different approach of sustained development based on knowledge and innovation. Innovation is the complete process of taking new ideas and design new or improved products and services. And with that on mind, we need to, in our communities, recognize the advantages that we have and to foster forms of innovation. Figuring out the sets of activities, you need to develop the potential and the huge potential that we see on the Azores, and also to attract, in this case, startups for this innovation, but also try to attract all kinds of companies that operate in the space sector. The new international order showed that Europe needs to achieve and develop autonomy and resilience in so many areas, and in particular in the space sector. Space is at the end diplomacy and a tool to foster cooperation, creating synergies between partners, and Portugal, through the Azores, wants to cooperate in the international arena to further develop the new space industry towards an European resilience, fostering innovation and tackling, at the same time, the big challenges that we have today, like our oceans and biodiversity that we need to take care of. As you will see, nowadays there are several ground segment infrastructures capabilities in Azores, particularly in Santa Maria Island, where we are partners in Galileo, Copernicus, ESA, and with private operators. Also in Santa Maria, the RAES infrastructure, besides the VLBI for geodesy and other instrumentation that complement that activity, a telescope for space debris detection is also operated, not forgetting to mention the Operations Center for the EU space surveillance and tracking in Terceira Island. Soon, there will be a space debris detection radar fully operational in Santa Maria. This journey started in the early 2000s, and now the space sector needs to move to the next step in Santa Maria and in the Azores. The moment now is to leverage the geographical potential of Santa Maria to promote the attraction of new services, new technologies and players. This is aligned with the National Space Strategy and the European Space Programme. Driven by the ESA Space Rider project and due to its long airport runway, Santa Maria will be the access point and the returning point from space, where besides the Space Rider landing facilities, a space technological center will be developed that will include the payload processing facilities and other support facilities that will also be able to service the operation of high altitude platform stations, space planes, and horizontal launching systems as examples. Also, the Space Technological Center is intended to have an engine and rocket test components facility. Concerning the access to space, besides the willingness to install a vertical launch spaceport, a suborbital launch challenge will be prepared for the end of 2023. This strategy is focused on attracting private operators and investors to ensure sustainable business models that can spill positive impacts in our islands. To promote and to act, the government of the Azores welcomes to all companies and investors and is working closely with the Portuguese Space Agency, with the support of the European Space Agency, reaffirming the Atlantic centrality of Europe in the Azores. You can be assured that the success of the Azores space ecosystem will be made by the companies and investors, and you all can count with the support of public entities. Today, you have our commitment to work with all partners to open the Azores to these new opportunities, reinforcing our potential and bringing value to you, to the Azores and our people, and to Portugal, bringing a new era towards the development and expansion of the Azorean space ecosystem. I will try to share a video. Well, thank you. Sorry if I took a bit longer, but just to sum up, New Space is already here for a few years, and the Azores wants to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paulo. That was a very interesting presentation, and I think it served as a. Thank you very much, Paulo. And it served as a perfect kickoff to this debate on this panel on the new space challenges. So next we have Lieutenant Colonel Pedro Silva Costa, whom I'll introduce briefly. He's an electrical engineer and holds a master's degree in military sciences, security and defense from the Military University Institute. He's currently at the Defense Department of the Portugal Space Agency as a space specialist representing the General Staff of the Armed Forces, responsible for themes such as space surveillance and tracking and space traffic management. And he is the national contact point for innovation and development, space and defense at the European Defense Agency. His presentation will be on the new space challenges, the Azores Archipelago and space exploration. I'll give you the floor for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. Well, I start saying I want to say thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It is a great honor to be here, be part of this event. Thank you. Well, my presentation will try to establish a relationship between the values in the new space concept and the ongoing or expected space program in Açores. When we talk about the new space, we are talking about the third space race marked by a change in motivations, where space is no longer exclusive domain for states, with the entry of no state actors in this strategic domain. This race began more than 23 years ago, a lot of time already. It is marked by a democratization of access to space, and there are relevant areas of change, specifically in the launch vector, in the construction of constellations of small satellites for low orbits, and in the concern for space sustainability. These are the most challenging areas in new space. Well, this is my agenda. I propose a short trip over some of the role of the Azores in space exploration from the first space race and seeking to fit the reflections to the future. The geostrategic localization of the Azores has been valuable for building and projecting power in the past. Well, the development in air power are the best. No, we see this morning. We saw this morning, sorry. However, Azores played a relevant role in launch vector developments for the French. After France was able to launch the first artificial satellite, the Asterix, from Amaguir, Algeria, and after the independence of this country, the French nuclear and space program was moved to Biscarrosse, near Bordeaux. Here, France continued to development of the launch vector. And when we look to the launch vector, well, it's similar to a ballistic missile or a space rocket is similar. The difference is mostly in the payload. This development were possible with the support of a telemetry installation on the Flores Island. The Flores Island had in this period remarkable development with the presence of an important French community. With the operation of the European Space Agency facilities in French Guiana, the French facilities of Biscarrosse ceased to be relevant, and with this situation, the telemetry installation of Flores Island is no longer important. The task that the telemetry station of the Flores Island development was similar to the present carried out by the antenna of the European Space Agency in the teleport of Santa Maria. And so we make a leap to the present. The Azores has a relevant role in monitoring space development. This is a list of existing infrastructures in Azores in the monitoring of space exploration, and one of the determining factors in the installation of these elements is the geostrategic position of the archipelago. This list may not be totally complete. They will be the most relevant elements. I would draw attention to the years referred. In the last years, there are an increasing number of equipments installed, which shows the dynamic presence of Azores in the activity in the space exploration at the present. The national panorama is marked by a strategy that allows the definition of priorities in order to align and coordinate efforts for the projection of Portugal in space. The strategy of Portugal for Space, which allows to continue to integrate the cooperative efforts within the European Space Agency, has leveraged and allowed the coordination of actions in different areas of the Portuguese society, including in defense, which has also built a strategy for space, in allusion to the dual use of space technology. The national strategy established the basis for the Portuguese Space Agency, which is the entity responsible for coordinating national actions in this area. The agency was these founding entities. I show the 4 entities. I would highlight the presence of the defense, but above all, I would highlight the presence of the Azorian government, and it could not be otherwise, given the importance that the Azores has in space exploration and for the strategic axis. In particular, the second one, where we found new areas of intervention with the connection possible to new space concept, like space launch areas, ground stations for support operation of mega constellations, and programs like space surveillance and tracking. The Azores have not only a high attractive geographical localization, but also excellent safety conditions for ports of access to space, vertical takeoff and horizontal takeoff also. But this geostrategic position is also excellent in supporting the operation of satellite constellations. The national strategy for space reflects this value. Differentiation strategies take advantage of Portugal's geographical localization, namely the country's Atlantic position, capitalizing on the scientific and technological base and the national capacity. This is based on the function power. Portugal can project influence in the international relations in the strategic vector for the states, the space domain. This power is related to the geographic position of the Azores archipelago. However, I would reinforce that this functional power assumes a greater importance in the context of Portugal in the world when we create a huge triangle with Azores, Madeira, and mainland Portugal. But the elements that mark the presence of Azores in the national strategy for space are not exhausted with the launching infrastructures or the support to the operation of satellite constellations. Other projects here, it is possible to identify the role of Azores, like the 15 meters antenna on the teleport in Santa Maria and the project Space Surveillance and Tracking. This project has sensors installed in Azores, including here in Santa Maria, but I would highlight the Space Operations Center in Terceira Island, which serves as a hub for the information collected from other sensors of the system installed in Madeira Island and Pampilhosa da Serra in mainland Portugal. This project contributes to the identification of objects in space, contributes to space security, and to the sustainability of the space domain. The unique characteristic of Azores in terms of localization, reduced light pollution, and reduced air traffic are strong arguments to install additional sensors for monitoring space objects in this region. Well, to close the look to structural documents, a look to Azores strategy for space. This strategy is also aligned with national strategy for space and with the objectives outlined by the European Space Programme. It highlights the valorization of resources and in particular the issue of geocentricity. And based on these strategic documents, we can now look to the future. The challenge identified in the scope of the new space concept are space launch areas, ground stations for support operations of mega constellations, and new skills like programs for the support to space sustainability, space surveillance and tracking projects. And answers foreseen in the scope of these documents are new spaceports, new or reinforce strategic ground infrastructures to support the space operations, and programs like space surveillance and tracking projects. Let's look at each of these challenges. Well, space launch areas. The creations of spaceports is the answer to the dependence on these infrastructures, and the European case is paradigmatic. It is dependent on the spaceport of French Guiana. This situation may change with the response from the United Kingdom, which plans to build 7 spaceports in the next few years. I think we need to make some reflections about this information. Another topic, the ground stations. Well, in face to the increasing amount of constellation, it is expected the ground equipment to support technology in space. In this topic, the source geographic localization is excellent and among other values, such as employment and establishment of companies, it may potentiate the international cooperation in the space domain. And finally, the space surveillance and tracking projects or systems. We are talking about new violence in the space sector, which the Azores already follow, and with the potential increases of sensors may reach a high value and place our country in the relevant position regarding space sustainability. On the other hand, it will place Portugal in the position of strategic advance due to its situational knowledge of outer space. So I highlight some conclusions. And the first one is Azores can contribute significantly to the new space concept in the strategic domain for the digital society. In the past, the Azores already supported France's access to space. In the present, they support the European Space Program, but can leverage Portugal in this domain. However, it needs to act in favor of differentiating values in the current space race, particularly regarding the access to space. To support the operation of space technology and space sustainability. And the Azores, due to their excellent geographical localization, are in strategic position to meet these challenges. So finally, to close my presentation, the relationship with the new space concept and Azores are geography. That once again allows the projection to the influence of states in international relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another very detailed and interesting exposition on the challenges that Portugal faces, that the Azores face, and that the world in general face in this new dominion of space relations. Thirdly, I now welcome Licínia Simão. Licínia holds a PhD in international relations. She has been an advisor to the Portuguese Minister of Defense since 2018, and since August 2021, she is the coordinator of the Atlantic Center, highly involved in the organization of this conference as well. She is an assistant professor in international relations at the School of Economics at the University of Coimbra and a researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the same university. Here she will speak on space technologies and Atlantic security. I'll give you the floor, 15 minutes as well.
Thank you very much, but no. I'm looking back. Okay, thank you very much, Patrícia. Thank you, everyone, for attending this last panel, and thank you to the previous speakers and still the speakers to come. It's really a privilege to join such knowledgeable speakers for this afternoon. I am going to focus mostly on the use that we can make of the information that satellites and space-related technologies provide us. So what is it that we do with this information? What are the hurdles of using that information? What are the problems that also arise? And this has to do, of course, with the mission that the Atlantic Center has at its bottom. So I will start with some information on what is the Atlantic Center, what is the project, and how are we incorporating also the space dimension into what we are developing. So the Atlantic Center's core principles are to promote a view of Atlantic security that is encompassing of the whole Atlantic. It's very curious because we heard this afternoon Alexandre speaking about Brazilian foreign policy, and he was speaking about a Southern Atlantic identity. And one of the things that the Atlantic Center tries to promote is an inclusive view of an Atlantic identity, bringing North and South together. Historically, this has been a no-starter for many other projects. We are happy to count Brazil into the group of states that are currently supporting this initiative alongside other North Atlantic partners, including Portugal and other European countries, but as well as the United States. So we can say that the Atlantic Center is perhaps one of the first initiatives that has broken that historical legacy of dividing the North and the South Atlantic, and we're very proud of that, and we cherish very much this initial start that is very promising. So we try to overcome that divided view of the Atlantic and try to promote a whole of Atlantic view of security. Also, we have a broad concept of security. The Atlantic Center is hosted by the Ministry of National Defense, but we do not look at defense-related aspects only. So we bring in other areas of security linked with economic sustainability or sustainability of resources, criminal activities, and others that impact communities across the Atlantic. We tend to follow the security issues as they present themselves to us by our partners. And so we've been successful, I think, in also responding to the needs and to the priorities of our partners by having this broad concept of security. And we work on a principle of complementarity. There are many other initiatives across the Atlantic that do a lot of valuable work with different historical roots and traditions, and we try to work with those initiatives to complement the work that they are doing. And I think that has been so far another key to our success. Okay, there you go. So this is more or less the steps that have been taken by the Portuguese government to get us to where we are. So in 2018, the Portuguese government decides to create a center in Lajes Air Base to promote capacity building on security and defense in the Atlantic. So that's the original mandate, is to use the capacity that our armed forces have to train, to equip, to update doctrine, to create new capabilities for defense, for armed forces elsewhere. And we thought that we could benefit from the existing structures in the Azores and Lajes particularly to develop a project here. So since 2018, we've been working on this project, and in 2019, we had a first seminar of the Atlantic Center organized by the Portuguese Ministry of Defense. And what we did with that seminar was to have an extensive set of consultations with experts across the Atlantic on the simple question is, what can the Atlantic Center become that will respond to existing needs? And from those reflections, they are published as an IDN brief, the National Defense Institute brief, which was a partner and continues to be a partner for our initiatives. We kind of adjusted the mission of the center. We focused on three tiers. One is political dialogue. We need political dialogue across the Atlantic, north, south, east, and west. So we focus on promoting meetings, encounters, discussing priorities, security needs, and so on. Constant dialogue. If we speak to each other, we tend to resolve issues in a more peaceful way. So that's a good thing. The second dimension is a think tank capacity. So we need to revisit the issues of security that are facing the Atlantic. This is a fast changing environment, and we need to revisit and produce new knowledge, new doctrine, also to support this idea of a whole of Atlantic view. And the third dimension is the capacity building dimension that came from the original mandate. And so we are developing training courses, specific activities, sharing of best practices, updating doctrine, and so on, so that we respond to a fast-changing environment in many of the Atlantic countries. And so we've been working on what we see as mutually reinforcing dimensions. The three dimensions together produce better policy, a better use of resources, and we've been working since 2019 with this format. And in 2021, when Portugal held the presidency, the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, we used also that moment to push the agenda of the Atlantic Center, and we had a formal launch of the center in the Terceira Island, and we signed a political declaration at the time with 16 countries. We are now 21 and trying to enlarge this club. It's a very simple statement. You can find it online on our website. It says that we support this objective of a cooperative Atlantic that works to solve security issues commonly. And in 2022, we adopted a roadmap for the next 3 years to guide the development of the center. And this is, let's say, the political framework for our activity. This is the list of countries that have joined so far. So as I said, there are 21 countries committed to the principles of the center and to developing the initiative. Hopefully we can enlarge this set. The latest member was Denmark to join the center, also a maritime country strongly present in the commercial area of maritime trade. And this is our mission statement that we have adopted in the roadmap. It says that the Atlantic Center will contribute to the development of an Atlantic community of interests focused on the security of the Atlantic region, understood in broad terms, and committed to developing cooperative initiatives and actions to tackle jointly agreed priorities under the principle of complementarity. So it's one of those statements that tries to bring in all the different sensitivities, but we're happy with what it's written here. I think it works for everyone. It has been a good driver for our work so far. So a bit more on how this initiative is looking into space also as a part of the work that we can do. What I decided to do was look at the main institutional frameworks, the main players that we have across the Atlantic, and how they are looking at the sea and how they are bringing space into their strategies, their security strategies, because security is what we do. And I started with the EU Strategic Compass, adopted just recently in spring. And in what concerns the Atlantic, particularly in the Strategic Compass, for those of you who don't know, the Strategic Compass is the document that will guide the development of the EU's security and defense policy. So this is where any security concerns regarding the Atlantic would be expressed. And what we see is that EU security concerns in the Atlantic relate to maritime security, broadly speaking, in these 4 areas: ensuring that maritime security produces economic development, that free trade is guaranteed and open lanes of trade are maintained in the Atlantic, transportation flows and develops, and it also contributes to the EU's energy security. And then the Strategic Compass also identifies other relevant threats that exist in the Atlantic, extremism and terrorism, hybrid strategies by adversaries, cyber and space-related security threats, climate change, environmental degradation, and the impacts of natural catastrophes that we have to attend to and that are hitting the European Union more frequently. So it's a big list of things. The question is, how is space supporting the EU in addressing this? And the EU has adopted also recently its new space program. We've heard a Lieutenant Colonel speaking of that, and many of the initiatives that are hosted here in the Azores are funded somehow and in some way by the EU and its interest in space programs. So the EU space program aims to provide these space-related services to users and support EU political priorities, strengthen the EU's role as a leading global power, boost an innovative space industry, and maintain the EU's autonomous access to space. So you can see that if you transfer many of these objectives to the Atlantic, and expecting that many of the European Union member states will be supportive of a stronger and active EU in the Atlantic, particularly Portugal, that has recurrently placed the Atlantic as a key foreign policy priority, then we will be looking at the space capabilities of the EU to respond to some of the needs that have been identified in the strategic compass. So the EU space program is a civilian program, but we have seen increasingly that it's also serving geostrategic political priorities and certainly security and defense needs as well. I looked also at the NATO strategic concept. NATO addresses space system security and the potential utilization of space for adversarial attacks on NATO allies. It mentions, the strategic concept mentions that Article 5 could be invoked to respond to hostile operations to, from, or within space. So it opens this possibility of Article 5 being used. It has to do with something that Lieutenant mentioned as well, the militarization of space and the risk that that might be developing. The applicability of international law is strictly expressed. So this is something that NATO allies are still dealing with, is the new military operations that may develop related with space technology and how to apply international law to those in those situations. And of course, the importance of supporting a boost of resilience to space capabilities of NATO members that serve the alliance as a whole. Then I decided to look down also to the African Union and look at the African Union's development interest and security interests in the Atlantic, and also after this also on space, because also in the South Atlantic you have strong space capabilities being developed. So the African Union adopted this the African Charter on Maritime Security and Safety and Development in Africa. So it's very interesting that security, safety, and development are brought together in the African strategy, which sometimes in the European strategy or NATO strategy certainly are not linked together. They are more strict security and military documents. And maritime security, as the strategy goes, is key to our peace and prosperity. We will strengthen our posture and situational awareness. So satellite technology is really important for situational awareness in the Atlantic, to deter and defend against all threats in the maritime domain, uphold freedom of navigation. We spoke yesterday about this morning about UNCLOS and the International Convention that rules freedom of navigation, and that is extremely important. Secure maritime trade routes and protect our main lines of communications. We spoke about the data cables also today, and that is also part of what satellites can help us monitor and control. And this is also to cover and to illustrate the many areas that Africans, and here driven by the African Union once more, are bringing to their space development. So you have climate change, environment management, etc., integration, infrastructure, resource management, knowledge, safety and security, reconnaissance and innovation, development, empowerment, and employment, and the rightful share of global commons in charge of space, land, and oceans. So we see a very inclusive and complete agenda by the African Union in what regards their space development. And this is the institutional process that is ongoing in Africa. So the adoption of the Statute of the African Space Agency in 2018, the study on structural implications of the African Space Agency and a modular approach to develop its structure, and also the financial implications. So we can see that as a whole, the African continent will face many challenges, infrastructural, financial, to develop, but you do have African powers who are leading ahead in this more democratized environment that the new space offers. And then I finished, of course, with Brazil, because it's one of the key players in the space race, if you want, in the Latin America. And these are four key elements. So Política Nacional de Desenvolvimento das Atividades Espaciais, Sistema Nacional de Desenvolvimento das Atividades Espaciais, Programa Nacional e o Plano Plurianual, the four elements. And when you look at the national program for space activities for 2022 to 2031, these are two key elements. The vision is for Brazil to become the South American country that leads the space market. So it's a statement, a vision of what Brazil wants. It's ambitious, but it's a guiding, it's a goal, right? And these are the key areas for which the development of the space sector should contribute to: infrastructures, the agricultural and animal sector, mining, the environment, education, civilian defense, and national defense, and public security. So a set of applications for the space program that Brazil is also developing. My final slides, and I guess my time is kind of running out, is to call your attention to one of the outputs that is available on our website and also at the National Defense Institute's website. This is the IDN Cadernos number 40, was published in 2021 and resulted from the second seminar of the Atlantic Center that we organized. Exactly. In one of the working sessions, the third seminar, I'm sorry. In one of the working sessions, we had the topic of operational responses to crisis. And we specifically asked our participants and speakers to address the role of space technologies in these operational responses. So I wanted to share with you, there's a lot of stuff here. I'll try to synthesize the main conclusions that came out of that afternoon of reflection. So one is that the use of space-based technologies in civilian and military contexts presents particular challenges and characteristics. One of them is that the Atlantic is quite challenging, a vast extension that requires a lot of reliable and detailed information to address crisis, right? Another aspect is that the data collected from satellites is also important for us to produce new scientific knowledge. We spoke about oceans this morning, the continental shelf, so there's a huge use for those aspects as well. And this lack of homogeneity in the Atlantic that we were just speaking. So you have a dispersity of capacities looking at the European context, but also looking at other situations where development is not so advanced. Space-based technologies have also been used in operational responses to natural disasters and humanitarian emergencies. Space-based technologies are also useful in monitoring illegal activities, naturally, and in the military realm, space-based technologies have been used for multiple operations, including naval operations. So this is there's a regular use of this technology for many of the crises that we are addressing in the Atlantic. There are nevertheless obstacles that were identified, and they relate to data access, data sharing, and data analysis. So if we can't use the data, then what's the point of having so many satellites producing them, right? So that's the other part of the issue. So despite the utility of these space-based technologies to collect data, several problems were identified, namely issues related to access, availability, and sharing of data, lack of interoperability, and lack of analytical capability. So you have two core scenarios. One is cooperative. For instance, in operations of search and rescue and scientific research, you will easily have cooperation among countries, but you also have competitive scenarios. For instance, in the exploitation of natural resources, and the management of the economic exclusive zones or other areas that are deemed of national interest. So cooperation is not always guaranteed around information coming from satellites and other equipments related to space. There are clusters providing the same kind of information that can lead also to a lack of interoperability and confusion in moments of crisis. So it's important to have a hierarchy of knowing who does what and which information you are actually using, and also a lack of analytical capability that may prevent the production of knowledge that can be usable. And then another feature in the Atlantic is the formation of constellations, the diversification of tools, and the democratization of data. And here, our conclusions related mostly to the work of the Portuguese Space Agency, the Air Center, and others that I will not go into detail also because they've been extensively detailed here. So to conclude, space-based technologies reinforce our capacity to monitor the ocean. They are complementary in that sense. They are not the only or the exclusive tool we have, but they complement our capability. There are cooperative opportunities in industry, in science, and governments, but data sharing and analytical capacity are key to make this tool useful. There are sovereignty issues that may drive competition in space technologies, and so multilateral cooperative efforts, very much like the Atlantic Center, that are output-driven and result-oriented, can reinforce cooperation, and also to provide support to defense and security activities by states or coalitions of states. This is also our ambition, that we can become more of a clearinghouse and a hub for specific types of operations, and so we can collect information from across the Atlantic and share it with countries across the Atlantic as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Licínia, for this detailed explanation of what the center has been doing, this young center has been doing, its vision of an development of an Atlantic identity, and also the comparative analysis between documents. So last but not least, I have the pleasure of introducing, let's see if she is online before I introduce our last speaker.
Hi, hello. Hello from Prague. Can you hear me?
She is. There she is. So, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. And welcome, Dr. Christina Giannopapa. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you perfectly. And
It looks like we have a slight delay in our communication.
Can you hear me? We do. I will give a short introduction and then pass the floor over to you. So Dr. Christina Giannopapa is the head of the Office of the Executive Director of the European Union Space Programme Agency. Before that, she was an advisor to the Secretary General of Telecommunications and Post of the Ministry of Digital Governance in Greece, seconded from the European Space Agency. Dr. Giannopapa holds a PhD in Engineering and Applied Mathematics, a Master in Engineering in Manufacturing Systems Engineering and Mechatronics, and an MBA in International Management from the University of London. Additionally, she holds an assistant professor position in the Department of Industrial Engineering and Innovation Sciences at the Eindhoven University of Technology. Today, she will speak to us on the new opportunities for space as an enabler for the Atlantic. The floor is yours, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. It's also virtually. I wish I was there. Last time I have been in the Azores was in 2017, just 2018, just before the creation of the Azores Center. So I'm very pleased to see all the progress and all the activities that have taken place there. So today I'm here with you to talk to you about space as an enabler for the Atlantic and about new opportunities. And also to tell you a couple of things about the European Space Agency, the European Space Program, and how things have been evolving. So EUSPA, the European Union Agency for the Space Program, has a long road. It's an old newcomer, let's say. The endeavors started in 2002. With the Galileo joint undertaking, so for the development of Galileo activities. And then in 2010, there was the European GNSS Agency created, which is actually the predecessor of EUSPA in Prague. And in 2021 is marked the time of the new EU space regulation. The EU space regulation is actually doing two things. On one side, it is putting all the various components that existed until then for space under one umbrella, the EU space program umbrella. And it also creates EUSPA from its predecessor GSA with enhanced activities and enhanced capabilities. So the new EU Space Program 2021-2027, as I mentioned, it brings under a single umbrella the various pillars that already existed, and it's complementing it with additional ones. The ones which already existed before is EGNOS and Galileo. So the EGNOS is the augmentation system, which today has evolved, and it is taking different navigation satellite signals and enhances them in order to ensure better signals and safety of operations. In particularly today, it has been established in more than 400 airports in various countries, and it is additionally expanding. Then Galileo is actually the navigation system of the European Union based on the Galileo satellites. It has today more than 3 billion users worldwide. Then we have Copernicus, focusing on the area of Earth observation, which is the number one provider about providing data free of charge, 220 terabyte of data per day. We heard from the previous speakers also in relation to the data provision and the accessibility to it. So Copernicus is comprehensive and it is there. GovSatcom is a new pillar that was added in the last EU space program, focusing on covering the area of satellite communications. We also heard from previous speakers that there is, let's say, an increasing possibility provided by satellites in the area of governmental satellite communications, and this is the next pillar. In addition is space situational awareness, space surveillance and tracking. We heard also some activities taking place around the Azores area, and then it's about research, innovation, entrepreneurship, capacity building, etc. So EUSPA's mission is focused under three particular pillars. Enhanced capabilities from GSA to EUSPA, in particular in the area of exploitation. It is focusing on the Galileo and EGNOS service provision. So 24/7 operations for the satellites that are there to ensure that they provide the availability. Also with the new activities that are developed under the GovSatcom, EUSPA is going to develop and is developing the GovSatcom hub, which is going to pool and share capabilities of existing satellite systems in order to provide governmental services. Space surveillance and tracking. As of 2023, we'll be holding the front desk of the SST partnership, succeeding the consortium. Then in the area of security, which is the second pillar, it is responsible for the accreditation of all various components of the space program. It has to ensure that the Galileo and EGNOS are available 24/7, and for that it has a Galileo Security Monitoring Center. In terms of market development and communications, it is there to develop and mobilize and enhance the downstream development in all areas that are there. And let's see a little bit the different components more in detail. I talked a little bit about Galileo and EGNOS. EGNOS has been providing services since 2009, December since 2016. Now we have 28 Galileo satellites in orbit, which provide, they have one part which is the free and open access signal, which is available. It is a system that we're very proud. It is it is better than its equivalent ones from Galileo, from GPS and GLONASS. And it will provide different services which are underdeveloped and in continuously for search and rescue of service, for example, and I will talk about that a bit later. And there is a particular signal which is more encrypted, enhanced for governmental services, the so-called public regulated services. Copernicus, as mentioned, it is the more comprehensive system today. Various pillars that it can provide data for, free and open access to all users, accessible, that they are willing to tap into this data. Maritime, of course, atmosphere, climate change, security, emergency land, they're all very much relevant to the Atlantic as well. As we have heard also from previous speakers. Then the next one is governmental satellite communications, the new activities that the EU space program is engaging. We heard also about from the different speakers that we need to ensure that there is fragmentation of various activities, and we need to ensure that there is interoperability and use of the resources in an efficient way. And GovSatcom will be the system to provide these capabilities for governmental services and governmental users. After giving you an overview about EUSPA and the EU space program, I would like to focus a little bit on space and maritime. How can space be an enabler in the area of the Atlantic and to provide different options? In particular, if we look at maritime, today the maritime sector is looking at different routes, is looking at more green and autonomous vessels. The combination of data of Galileo and Copernicus can support this type of activities. Also, they can also support logistics with autonomous pilotage and providing safe pilotage when port activities are taking place. Talking about route optimization, in order to ensure that the route optimization takes place, one cannot forget that we have the ices melting at the Arctic, which provide different routes through the seas over there. And for example, the Copernicus data can provide safe paths to navigate and go through. Another example I would like to make is the vessel positioning. By combining Earth observation and navigation data and AIS information, one can get an understanding of what is happening through the movement and the trafficking. In particular, what you see in this image, the white spots is what can be seen from above. As they move along, they are the green ones which are passing the path through their AIS. They're recognized and we see in the red dots, we can see there is something there, but they have switched off their AIS. So then the question is, what is going on there? So if we monitor this picture for quite some time, as you saw above, then we can see, for example, the lines that are there, which they provide the route of the movement. then we can see the fishing activities taking place, and also those that were before in the red dot, that they might be having, let's say, a strange activity in the area. So in terms of now moving to another part for the fisheries area, there is data from Sentinels, for example, can be seen here, where fishing cages are looked at, and they look around the environment and the health of the waters around and the cages. They can identify if algae, for example, are developing. So this is another example. So in terms of the activities, vessel monitoring, search and rescue can be supported by activities from the European GNSS activities. They can provide availability of service, accuracy, integrity, and authentication. Recently, we signed a cooperation agreement with the European Agency for the Fisheries, which has a focus on safety of operations, and we will see together with them of specific things that can develop further. Another one I would like to touch upon is the authentication. When the Galileo can provide authentication that one is receiving the right signal, we will have service provision by 2023. And just before that, I would like to let you know that Galileo today, in terms of safety of services, in search and rescue, when there are, let's say, vessels on the sea on distress, it can, by sending a signal and using the Galileo related beacons, it can give a signal back. So not only sending a signal, but also to be able to receive information that help is coming, and that is unique to Galileo. And I'll show you a nice video that demonstrates that. So as we said, there are a lot of things that space technologies can provide and boost further innovation. We heard about new space and new activities in the area, let's say, of maritime, just putting it in three pillars. On one side is the logistics and let's say cargo, route of etc. From the other side is data analytics, by providing all the different information that comes from different things like Earth observation, navigation, and onboard sensors that might be, in order to support those that have to make decisions in the maritime sector, in navigating the seas, and in addition, the intelligent operations of maritimes and the ship intelligence, which is another part that can be developed through these areas and provide new opportunities. Just before I close, I would like to bring to your attention the Cassini Prize that we currently have with a focus on maritime, so data-driven maritime and maritime digital applications, how to bring together different types of data from Copernicus, Galileo, in combination with other type of data sources. This competition is currently open until the 3rd of May 2023. We will have 3 users which will receive almost 1 million euros as a prize for their ideas. So all of those of you that are might have good ideas on this, you're welcome to look at our website and participate. And with this, I would like to thank you very much, and the floor is back to you.
Thank you very much, Christina, for giving us this detailed insight into the European Union Space Program Agency's work. And I see that we still have 20 minutes as of now for opening up the Q&A session. I think we've had 4 fascinating presentations on the role of space, on the opportunities and the enabling mechanisms that when we look at the role that space can play within the Atlantic. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I see that there's at least one already in the room. So if we could have the mic being passed to Michele. It's
not ready yet. Question, do you hear me? Do you hear me? I have a question for Dr. Giannopapa now. Question for Dr. Giannopapa. How does this Galileo rescue monitoring mission, etc., is used to control and target criminal organizations, smuggling everybody and everything? Thank you.
Okay, first, thank you very much for the question. So in terms of the Galileo search and rescue activities, what you see there, this search and rescue part, it is basically for when someone is in distress. They have these beacons that they basically send the signal, typically to the Coast Guard of wherever they are closer to. The signal goes to the satellite and then is returned, and then they know the exact location of where this vessel is for let's say sending them back response to support them. And Galileo is actually the only system that sends you back the information that help is coming, which is very important from the psychological perspective in relation to the persons that are in distress. Now, this part, the operations of what the Coast Guard is doing is a national activity. It's a national part of it, and they are the ones which receive the signal, and they take whatever decision in accordance to their provisions of what is there. So for the rest, let's say, relation to criminal activities, it is something that it is again a national activity, and this is decided upon and how it is operated and how the signals are used by the member states. They have the opportunity to decide how they want to operate. So I don't have anything else to say in this.
Thank you. We have at least 2 more questions. Licínia, my colleague, has a question.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And my question is to Christina as well. And my curiosity is to know whether the information collected by many of these satellite equipments and systems that you've mentioned that EUSPA is responsible for produce information and data that can be shared beyond the EU member states. And I'm thinking here particularly in security operations, security or defense operations, search and rescue, but also tracking criminal activities like Michele was just asking. Can that information be shared beyond the EU member states? Thank you.
Okay, so when we talk about Copernicus, it is free and open access data. So everyone can subscribe and enter into the system and receive the data that it is there. So it's free and open access. Technology development and participation to the EU space programs is something else. So for Copernicus, it is free and open access data to anyone. So anyone can enter and download and have access to the data that is provided by the Copernicus related platforms. For Galileo, it is also it has a part which is free and open access part. So that is for the free and open part. In terms of Galileo public regulated services, which it is restricted to the EU member states, and the definition of which member states can participate to which parts is defined in the EU regulation. And the provisions are related to that. But in essence, as I mentioned, Copernicus data, in order to promote the development of the downstream, and also like GPS is open to everyone. It has one part which is open to everyone. The same thing is with Galileo. And in terms of Copernicus, the images that are there are, let's say, free and open access data for it.
Thank you. We have 1 more question here, Alexandre, and over there.
Hello. Okay. Hello. Hello. Yes. I think we trying to connect all the panels. We could see new borders or limits to the Atlantic, further down the sea, from coast to coast in the north and the south, and going further into space. And from any perspective, for you from the panel, could we integrate more the poles, the north and the south pole, into the Atlantic, especially with the melting now? But from any of these perspectives, should we integrate more the poles into the Atlantic? The question.
Thank you. Are you addressing your question specifically to one of the panel members? So maybe what I'll do, I'll give the opportunity to each one of the speakers to reply. Paulo, I don't know if you can hear us and whether you want to answer this question.
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. I don't know if I have an answer. Yes. Sorry. So we have a bit of lag. But I can give an opinion. Of course, we shall integrate the poles, climate change and the potential impact that it will have in the poles and in the oceans and in the coastal areas. The monitoring of the poles is essential for the human species and for the human activities. So this is an opportunity. And also when we look for the orbits that Earth observation satellites are stationing, they very often cross the poles. It's the location that is more often crossed by satellites. So of course we shall do it. But I don't have a detailed opinion in that, and I don't know if probably if any of my colleagues in the panel can try to support me with this kind of answer.
Yes, I can support with a space vision, okay, or a space perspective. The space is a domain contested, competitive, and right now is congested, but is a domain for the cooperation. And this is the first step to make some points of cooperation with the north, south, the east, and the west. I agree with your vision, and I agree that the space is the factor for the cooperation with the old states in the Atlantic.
Okay, so I will add to that from the point of view of what the Atlantic Center is doing, we try to go down to the poles, to the South Pole and to the North Pole. And from a geopolitical perspective, that is quite obvious. So we spoke about new routes that are emerging out of climate change, due to climate change. And that has a clear security implication. It has also new opportunities for trade routes that are more effective, that we can use, but also a responsibility to look at these new common areas. We spoke this morning about the extension of continental shelves, right? And the claims that countries that are bordering the Arctic are now making, and their idea that they have special claims for an area that has been historically considered a global common. So I think we need to look at this very carefully, because it can be a source of tension and conflict, of course. The Arctic Council is a very interesting experience in political cooperation, where you have the Arctic countries or countries bordering the Arctic coming together with the participation of indigenous communities there as well, to design policies that are fit for the problems that emerge in the region. So with a lot of ownerships, I think that's a wonderful example that we can take elsewhere. So monitoring these changes and finding the right political platforms for these changes to be managed in a peaceful way, I think it's our main responsibility. So we try to incorporate that as much as we can into what we do. It really depends also on how sensitive people are. For instance, when we look, when we work with African partners or South Atlantic partners in general regarding security concerns in the Atlantic, their concern is not so much related to ice melting in the Arctic. But in the end, we can make the point, the link between the security concerns of North Atlantic and South Atlantic countries when you look into that. So it's having meetings and discussions with African partners on the Arctic is something that makes sense. It might not be obvious, but it's something that actually makes a lot of sense.
Christina, would you like to add something to the question?
I think just to follow the thoughts that the colleague said, of course, combinations of let's say, technologies and data can provide us a better understanding of the areas and the regions, both in terms of climate change, but also in terms of utilizing them for strategic reasons and development. So these combinations can provide new opportunities for newcomers in the space sector, new ways of doing things, and of course commonalities. Their commonalities can also be in the challenges, which they can look for common solutions. So yes, this is how we can bring the different elements together.
Great. We have another question over there, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your interesting talks. Because we are in Santa Maria, I would like to know, and the questions will be for Paulo Quental, the state of development and the schedules that are previewed to implement several you talk about, which is the spaceport, the space rider, the RIAG in Flores Island, and also what is the stage of the headquarters of the space agency here in Santa Maria Island.
Thank you for your question. So regarding some of the points that I addressed in my communication. So the spaceport is a goal, and the development or the new developments for the spaceport, as it is publicly known, they are expected before the end of this year, and we will proceed from that. Regarding the space rider. The space rider has Santa Maria as a landing site in the second phase of operation. In the first, it's intended to be at the French Guiana. And the infrastructures that are going to be developed for the space rider landing site, and they are intended not only for supporting the space rider, but also to support other activities in the space ecosystem. And as I stated, to prove Santa Maria as a returning point from space for other options. Also, we can use those facilities to support activities, as I mentioned, like space planes or high altitude platform stations. Regarding the headquarters of the Portuguese Space Agency, it is also publicly known that the public tender was awarded to a company already, and the process, the construction works are expected to start before the end of this year. At least is the communications that we have. Regarding the station of REG in Flores, there is already a station in Flores with the GNSS and the weather station capabilities. And the goal is to keep increasing sustainably the capabilities of the REG station in Flores. This is something that needs to be addressed in a medium term, or foresight in a medium term, in order to ensure that the operation is sustainable and useful for the Azores and the people from Flores.
I'm so sorry. So what we'll do, we'll have 2 or 3 more questions. We'll bundle them up. We'll take them all together. And then each of the speaker can, in a final remark, reply to a question of their choice. So I think first one in the back, at the back.
I shouldn't sit here, but good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for all the speakers, not only for this panel, but along the day that have been very interesting. Well, my question is regarding the main topic of this panel, which is the new space challenges versus the old space. So we usually tend to see the new space like coming the new companies providing the services that were provided by the governmental or the institutional entities. But the point is that at the moment, at least in Portugal and in some other countries, I wouldn't say the US or France or Germany, which are big countries in the space domain, but we have the data, we have satellites, we have, at least for Portugal, we have the geography, which was mentioned by Pedro. My question is, what is missing to Portugal to be a space power in the space domain? Once it seems that we have almost everything, but we are still giving very small steps. We are falling every time we try to do a major achievement, and all those steps are done with hard work. Thank you. It's challenging, the question.
Thank you. I'll keep this as brief as possible. My first question was to Paulo and to Lieutenant Colonel Costa. In my presentation on strategic air power, I apologize for neglecting the crucial role air traffic control has played in the Azores and its role in the Atlantic. Is space traffic control an opportunity for the Azores in the same way that air traffic control has been so important? And the second question I had was for Licínia, but also everybody else on the panel. Is it the 1969 UN Space Convention expressly prohibited the militarization of space? Is this something that we are going to continue to try and work within, or have we all decided collectively that militarization of space is now a fact, and we must be pragmatic and we must respond to the situation as it is, rather than the situation that we would prefer it to be? Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do, we have these two questions. We'll do the final round and by sequence of the presentation. And so I'll give the floor to Paulo, please. And then Pedro, Licínia, and Christina.
Thank you very much. I shall say that in the first question of this round, it's nice to hear you, João. Regarding your question, what Portugal is missing to be a superpower, I think it's missing more companies and more entrepreneurship. We have a potential market. We have, as you mentioned, the data. We are already a flying nation, and we have the potential to have data due to our geography. But I think we are missing companies, and we need to attract companies and to foster and to promote entrepreneurship in order for us to develop products that can aggregate value in the biggest chunks of the space economy. Regarding space traffic control, I know the Azores, and talking about the Azores, we have a space debris radar that is installed in Santa Maria that is soon to start operating, and also RAEC operates a telescope for detection of space debris. So Portugal is also taking some steps to position in this area and also to ensure the safety of the spacecrafts, of the Portuguese and European spacecrafts. Regarding the space militarization and the convention, I think that space has been militarized since the beginning and since before the signature of the Outer Space Treaty. So it will depend on in which space we draw the border of what is considered militarization. If information gathering is militarization of only putting arms in satellites or using satellites as weapons, will be considered militarization. But for this question, I think that the militaries are way better than me to reply. Thank you.
Well, the first one, what is missing, this is my personal opinion. Create some different values like spaceport, and infrastructure like that brings new companies, maybe big companies. Why? Because we are dependent from these infrastructures to respond to the new space concept. We need some mega constellations, yes, but we need to drive the satellites to the space. So for that, we need the spaceports. This is the difference in value to bring some companies. The second question, space control. Well, this is the biggest challenge for the new space. Why? Because they are related with the space sustainability. But this is a challenge not for only for the Azores, but for the entire world. We need to bring the value created in Azores and in other countries to create a big space control. We can do only in Azores, and this is the point for the international cooperation for this domain. This is the point for everything we can bring from the space continue. The space control is fundamental to the space sustainability. And about the space militarization, well, like Paulo said, space is militarized in the first space race, yeah, in the Cold era. And right now, the space is militarization in the different way, active way, with the arms in the space. It's just this is the difference, the active way with the arms in space. Thank you.
So thank you for three very complicated questions. Well, not being politically correct, I would say that what is missing for Portugal to make the best use of all the wonderful condition it has is political will and capital, right? That's all that is always missing. And I think Portugal has a chronic problem of scale. Often it has the perfect conditions to do a set of very useful and important activities, but then we cannot seem to have scale enough to be a space power, as you put it. So we will be a modest contributor, I think, to the space race and to the European efforts of having a more comprehensive use and view of satellite and other space-related activities. But unless there is a strong and clear consensus that this is something that should drive our development in the coming years, and then attracting the necessary capital that we in Portugal, strictly speaking from a governmental perspective, do not have. Unless there is a deliberate policy to attract the capital that needs to be there, we will not be a space power. But I think there is a modest contribution to be made, and that can have a strong impact in the Azores in particular, and in the way we understand ourselves as a technologically driven country that has an economy that is driven and sustained by technology. And I think space has a huge contribution in that regard. Traffic control. At some point, one of the things that was really interesting is also the removal of debris from space, right? So that's, I think, a business opportunity waiting to happen when people realize that they can make money out of removing stuff from space. I hope the Azores is the first to jump and say, look, we'll do it from here. And that's a wonderful contribution we can make. So if anyone has a nice business model for that, I think that's the future. And regarding the militarization, I from what we see, and I honestly don't have any detailed information, but from what we have seen in terms of the new active deployment of weapons in space, I think this is a very significant difference in scale from what we saw during the Cold War. So speaking as a citizen, I would be very happy if we had more an active monitorization of the fulfillment of the convention, right, and the obligations that go with it, and demanding that this stops and that we don't fuel the space militarization. Nothing good can come out of that. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, so just to start with the first question in terms of what is missing to become a space power, I think I'm going to take a completely different perspective than the previous panelists to this, to say that over the past years, we have seen an increasing number of space engagement. It is not anymore the definition of what is a space power the same as it has been in the past. We have a tremendous amount of data that it is there. We have a lot of activities. And I think the downstream market is part, and the development and the applications and the services from the downstream market, by combining space data of navigation, Earth observation, telecommunication, but also with air data and ground data, is the one that it is exploding the possibilities that are there to a new definition of what is there, in particularly when we talk about new space. In particularly, EUSPA has recently published a market report which is basically looking at Earth observation and navigation and the combination to it in the market. And we see that one of the tremendous areas of where space is going to be used in the future is insurance and finance. Now, when it comes to air and space, then I'm going to this part talk about space traffic management. It is we do not have a separation today and a definition today, so this is something that the EU has published a communication for this. And for the militarization part, dual use technologies is something that is always there, and it is I leave that to my colleagues from the national perspective. Thank you.
So we now come to the final of this very exciting and fascinating panel. I must say I learned a lot. It's a domain I had very little knowledge about. And what I think we can sort of say in terms of summarizing is that cooperation and competition is increasing vis-a-vis space in many domains, as we've heard. We've heard about space militarization. We've heard about the need for space infrastructures, the need for space sustainability, the need to monitor and to regulate how we use space. And maybe in terms of what Portugal's role could be, maybe a niche role, not necessarily asserting itself as a space power, but thinking that there can be a niche that's through maybe collaboration, I think is also one element which I think came out of all the presentations, the need for collaboration, pragmatic collaboration. We know that there are others out there who do not share our values, and in that sense, this idea of an Atlantic identity, and I'll finish with this idea which seems valuable to me, would be a small but important contribution as well. So coming to the end, I would like to thank all four panelists, the two present here next to me, the two online, for your excellent presentations. And I think you'll all agree with me that they deserve a big round of applause. And we've come to the end of this last panel, this last session, and I'll give the word now to Antonio. Thank you very much.
Just a practical word, but before that, thank you very much for all your presentations, the presence of you all participating on this meeting, this LPAZ forum, especially the efforts for the participants online. I think we were able to do a good rentrée after in what concerns LPAZ. It's an rentrée for our this effort that we are making to make a reflection, to think about the Atlantic through a small island in the middle of the Atlantic, and have a conscious about the this function that the Azores has on supporting mobility, knowledge, and transportation in the Atlantic. So thank you again. Just a brief words to our partners, the regional government. Our Professor Carlos Amaral is not here now. Thank you for the government support. The municipality has also been supporting us. This LPAZ forum this year had a special support from FLAD, Fundação the Luso-American Foundation for the Development. Our academic partners, ISCTE has always been here since the beginning as University of the Azores, especially the Center for Humanistic Studies. And I would mention regarding the support from and the collaboration with SageVind, the papers here presented, we are working on the possibility of having a publication enabled by SageVind, which I think will be very nice. TSA was a great partner, as I told this morning, on this forum, not only on sharing on a larger public on the transatlantic academics, but also supporting and sponsoring the travel of Richard Byers that's represented here, TSA and North Georgia University Atlantic Center, who was born in 2018 and has, as we've seen here, done a long job. And I hope that we keep being partners in thinking and having conscious about our role in the Atlantic. So just as I told you, practical words for tomorrow. This session ends now, but it's not the end of this forum, because tomorrow we'll have a practical reunion. We'll go to the field. So we are doing a strategical tour on the island and visiting strategical spots like the Santa Maria Teleport, the Raia Station, and the Air Traffic Control Center. So for now, my words would be these ones. I would give the word to Monica too, because she always has a special word to do. Anna Monica, I think the academical what I would like also to say. The academic partners are fundamental for us, for LPAZ. So please, Anna Monica.
No. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, again. Definitely in terms of the Center for International Studies of ISCTE, which I personally represent, but also in terms of the other institutions that have co-organized this event. This is obviously a very important moment for us. It's very good. It's an honor to be part of this exercise of reflection in what is something so central, has been central in our research, and it will be definitely continue to be so. I was trying to say something that I should have said before, but I thought it should be important to finishing this day in which we have a full day with panels and speakers online and in room with live stream and everything. I was just saying that we should say a special word to Ricardo Batista, because he has been our backstage superhero. So yeah. And obviously, not only, but obviously also to the staff in the library and the rest of the LPSZ team. And yeah, that was it. But again, let's hope that we can keep doing this next year or next years. Let's see. And thank you so much again to everybody. That's it. Let's go.